instead of going in depth and to present you what Joinup exactly is and what kind of functions it has, we thought to present you more of the practical side of Joinup and what it can bring to both public administrations and open source developers and open source communities. The first part will, of course, shortly present you what Joinup is. In the second part, we will present you the software projects, I believe 3 of them, that we have that we'll present, and we have, of course, much more than 3. The third part of the presentation will include a couple of case studies that we have on the platform, and the last part, Gijs will present 4 or 5 of the latest and most interesting news from the open source community and public administration.
Thank you, Konrad. I hope we don't make any mistakes here because our boss is in the room. So again, thanks for letting us speak here for a few minutes. If we run out of time, I will really race through the news, so just so you know. So this presentation will, in its entirety, explain what Joinup is about. And the project has basically 2 main target audiences. We're looking for public administrations that are interested in using open source or are considering open source, and they want to find tools to develop their policy, or they want to find examples of other public administrations that use open source so that they can help them develop a policy, convince their IT department, or convince their politicians why this is an interesting way to move forward in their IT strategy. The other target group, of course, are open source developers or open source service providers that want to reach out to these public administrations and help them build together a community around open source and public administrations. So, Konrad, maybe we can first impress the audience with a few of our impressive statistics.
I have just statistics from a couple of weeks ago, and right now we have exactly 269 software projects that are already hosted on the Joinup platform. In addition to that, you can find another 4,000 projects through the federated search system in the federated forges that we also that are also available through the search engine on Joinup. And currently we have around 100,000 visits a month, which for one person might seem not impressive, for the other quite impressive. I think as a project for public administrations, it's quite high value and number.
And how many users do we have that are registered on the system?
That's a good question.
Close to 8,000.
I think close to 8,000, yes.
Yeah. So he mentioned federated forges, and he sort of, really skipped over that. But I think it's worthwhile that I try to explain what it is. Joinup is a platform where you can actually host your software. So if you're a public administration, for example, the public administration of Poznan, they use a lot of open source, and they develop a few applications, and they think, hey, it's interesting if other Polish public administrations use this tool. They could host it on the site of the community of Poznan, but they can make a link to the Joinup platform, so other users visiting our site can find that application and download it. But there are many countries in the EU that already have such a repository. There's lots of them in Spain, for example, and a few in the Netherlands, and in Germany, and in Austria, and in the UK. And we're trying to build links with these repositories. So if you actually search on Joinup for a certain application or a certain feature that you think, hey, maybe that's available as open source, you will actually search in all those, in total, 11 repositories. And that's what we mean when we say federation. It's a federated forge. Sorry for the interruption.
I think we will skip the screenshots.
Well, the screenshot is interesting just so that you know where it is. That's what it looks like. And we would hope that you would go over there and experiment with the site and sign up and join us. So the second part of our talk, as I said, we will try to give some practical illustrations of what we do on the site, what the site has, is the projects. We will do 4 projects because there are over 4,000 projects out there, and we made a selection that we thought this is interesting. And the one that is the most popular in downloads, and most people look at it, is Wolmux. It's developed by the IT department at the German city of Munich. And it's a tool that helps you manage documents. It helps you manage templates and text blocks. And they developed it to help them battle managing macros. I think everybody here knows that Munich is moving its entire system to open source, the entire stack, including the desktop. And when they did this, they have about 14,000 desktops. They discovered that they had about 20,000 macros that civil servants had built and that helped them create documents, that helped them create templates and so on. And these things were built without revision history, without adequate documentation. And they were built without thinking long term. How do we do this in 10 years when our underlying system changes? So this became a big headache for the city of Munich. And they built this WOMUX tool to help them reduce the management headache. It reduces the need for macros. It doesn't replace them, but the macros become unnecessary. So already by using WOMUX, they reduced the amount of macros, I said 20,000, by 40%. And as I said, Munich is moving its entire desktops, its entire stack to open source, and at the moment, they recently announced that they have passed the 10,000 desktop milestone, which I think is very impressive. What's the next? Right, second illustration of a project, it's interesting because it's used by a lot of public administrations. It's a very good software illustration for reuse. It's Open Cemetery in English, or Open Cimetière in French. It was developed by the city of Arles in France, and it helps them to manage funeral schedules. It helps them to manage finding concessions in the cemeteries. And in Arles, they use it for managing 8 cemeteries, and it manages the records of about 32,000 or more deceased persons. So they know where they are. They've made it available as open source, and it's very rapidly becoming a very popular application in France. In 2009, over 200 municipalities in France started using the same tool, saving them a lot of time and effort and money. And the community around the development of Open Cemetery it became a lot faster. In 2009, they made it available in English. And it would be great if we could see that in 2012, it becomes available in Polish as well.
I'll present the next two softwares that are available on Joinup. The first one is Imundus. Imundus is a French by origin project. Is an integrated application platform for the Erasmus Mundus programmes, which Erasmus Mundus is a European Commission's program on cooperation and mobility in higher education. Originally, it was developed to facilitate students to apply online for the Erasmus Mundus programs. Students can create their online profile, they can submit their application, and if there is something wrong, the coordinators of the program can contact the students or a particular student asking for additional information to the application. However, because it's open source, it's quite versatile. And it's currently used by the University Sorbonne for their, let me just look it up, for their temporary teaching programs, and also by the French Embassy in the US for their scholarship programs. We have a little screenshots of the Imundus. And the last example of a software that actually it's a federated software. That's what Heis explained a couple of minutes ago. Porta Firma Electronico. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly. Heis speaks a bit of Spanish. It's a Spanish project it's basically a web app that allows public administration in Spain to manage a request document for electronic signatures. It's not only a web application, which means, of course, you can access it through any web browser on any operating system, but they also have mobile versions of that application, both on Android and iOS devices. And it's used by the Constitutional Tribunal in Spain, by universities, scientific institutes, universities, and city halls.
And so with that, we've given you 4 examples of projects that you can find, download, and help develop as public administrations. But Joinup has a lot more things, I shouldn't say things, that are really interesting for public administrations to look at and to read. And one of those is the case studies and the policy documents. So we're gonna talk about a few of them, hoping that we make you curious to read them all. We put a lot of effort in getting this at high quality out there. Now, this I have to read out because it's almost impossible for me to pronounce. But this is I'm going to talk for a few minutes about a procurement model developed in Sweden.
You want to take over my case study?
I'm sorry. Konrad is first.
The first is Katowice, of course, Polish city. It's a case study that we did in 2008, so 4 years ago. Not sure how, if they follow up with what they were doing. Before 2005, and in 2005 that's where they started implementing the project, they discovered that when they were upgrading hardware, they also had to, in most of the cases, buy the new licenses for the software, because the license for the software was assigned to particular hardware. And they said, let's save some money. And in 2005, they started the project of implementing OpenOffice instead of the proprietary Microsoft Office. And by 2008, in 2008, they had 800 machines, out of which 350 were running only OpenOffice. The rest was running both OpenOffice and the proprietary Office suite. And back then, they were able to share with us some of the information, how much they saved. And for the 350 PCs, by not buying proprietary licenses for the Office, they managed to save over 100,000 euros. I think that's quite impressive. But of course, it's not easy, as you might know, to convince people working in the public administration to use solutions such as OpenOffice. And I think that the IT department there used a very nice trick by giving the officials of the public administration there who worked in the municipality an option. They had 2 options, in fact. One was that they could keep their old PC, and by that they could also keep the Microsoft Office. But if they wanted to have a faster machine, so a new machine, new hardware, they would have to work only with OpenOffice. And interestingly, most of the people there decided for new hardware, and then only they had to work with OpenOffice. After that, the IT department there created or organized IT training for those who switched to OpenOffice.
They found out something interesting about the trainings too.
Yes, they also find out that, in fact, they found out that the learning curve. Okay, let me go back. And when you implement, when you introduce new software, or when you have a huge upgrade of software, you need to organize trainings for the people who use that software. And they found out that there was the same learning curve when you switch from proprietary Office suite to an open Office, and the same learning curve is when you upgrade from Microsoft Office 97 to Microsoft Office 2003. That was the same learning curve in terms of time spent for training and money spent for training. But they also found few issues. Of course, back then I think it was version OpenOffice 2 something. There was few problems with the formatting of the macros and then Excel. And because of the IT structure, the auto-update of OpenOffice did not always work correctly, and many times they had to auto-update that manually. And one of the things that they also discovered was that files saved in the open format saved them a lot of disk space.
So at Katowice at the time, if Womox had been available, they would have been useful for them. So I interrupted Konrad earlier, the impronounceable Swedish procurement model. It was developed by the Kammarkollegiet, which is the legal, financial, and administration services agency from the Swedish government. And they help all the public administrations to make it easier to procure any kind of software or services around software, so proprietary as well as open source. And they were scratching their heads a few years ago and thinking, how are we going to get these public administrations to use more open source, to try it out? Because they're worried about the support. And they're maybe worried about what do we do with applications that we developed in open source, and what do we do? So they did a very interesting model, which basically has two advantages. They looked at a bunch of open source service providers, and they selected 5 of them and talked to them and said, look, if there's a public administration that comes to you with a project that they want to do in open source, you help them, you take care of everything, and you make sure that if there's software code developed, made available as open source by the public administration, you as a service provider will make it available in the community. You will post it online, you will maintain the code, you will put the revisions, etc. in there. So that's one thing that made it very attractive. And the other thing is, if, for example, because this framework contract is available to ministries, to the bigger regional councils, and almost all the 290 municipalities in Sweden, if the project is so big that this service provider, which maybe has 200 people on board, it becomes too big for this one company to bear, the service provider is able, because of the nature of the contract, to hire other people, other companies in him, and start ad hoc consortia for a specific contract. And this model has proven very successful in Sweden. As I already mentioned a bit the numbers, there's about 300 municipalities there. And when the first version of this framework contract came out in 2007, it started growing by 10 to 15% per year, the amount of money used through this framework contract for open source. And they updated the version last year, and they ironed out a few of the errors. And the new version, which was published last year, has been growing by 25%. And that, the Swedish people told me, has never been done before with any of their framework policies that they have developed over the years. So it's very successful. And if there are public administrations in the room, I hope, they should read the case study that the link is on the site. They should read this case study and consider using a similar approach. It's very successful.
And I think also they should read this document. We talked during the coffee breaks today with at least few representatives of various levels of the public administration. And I think based on their feedback, what they told us, that's also a very interesting and necessary and needed document for everyone in the public administration. The guideline on public procurement of open source software, it was, I believe, initiated in 2008.
Correct.
And the latest version is, and it's still up to date, from 2010. The main purpose of this document, the main purpose of this document is to help public administrations to understand how to procure for open source software and the open standards. It explains how to, not only how to procure the open standards and open source software, but also when to do it, how to do it, how to develop open source policy, how we can influence the open source policy, even if it's not set up directly in a specific country. It also explains the functional and technical requirements and business models, and how those three can actually influence in the public procurement the choice, the final choice, and the preference. It also explains, maybe Heis can explain, because that's, I think, his favorite part, what the exit cost is and what it should be. But it's also, and the last thing that is on the slide there, and I think it's a whole summary of that document, is that the public administration is in fact required to create sustainable public ICT at the end of the procurement. And that can only be done when you combine both open source software and open standards.
Which I can tie in a little bit about this. One of the people working at the European Commission until recently involved with both Joinup and its predecessor, the OZOR. He, for example, says that a tax agency that develops an application for its citizens to file their taxes every year, that tax application should be made available as open source. Not only because it's done with public money, so it can be used by others, but also it's a nice way to make sure that actually the whole tax process goes the way we assume it is going. It's transparency, openness. And these exit costs, it's not so much my favorite topic, except that I come across it very often when I talk to public administrations. And they tell me, for example, the city of Mannheim in Germany, yeah, we really tried migrating to open source because we think it's the right way for us. But we were stuck on this proprietary system, and it was very expensive to migrate to open source. And then I think they shouldn't be calling it migration costs. Those are actually called exit costs. Because you should have, suppose that was like €1 million, you should have added that to the bill of the proprietary software supplier at the time when you procured his solution, saying, it's going to cost me $1 million to get rid of you, so I'll add that to your sales price. Just, I'm prepared. And it's that kind of arguments that documents like the Open Source Procurement Guide will help you prepare for your own IT department and for your own politicians.
The document is 40-something pages, and really advise you to read it, and the link is up there.
Was that just somebody telling us we're running out of time?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, so I already said, if we're running out of time, I'm going to race through the news. So I'm responsible for most of the news items on Joinup, and I will just give you a rundown of the biggest projects out there, because it's interesting for public administrations and everybody else in the room. But just to give you an idea, who here has been on Joinup before? Excellent, I have a completely new crowd. Who knows that Iceland has recently published a policy that prepares all the public administrations, ministries, city councils, what have you, everything, for migrating to open source? Who has heard about that? Okay, there's a few hands. So that was news that was first published on Joinup, and then published everywhere else, including the Wall Street Journal. The three biggest projects in Europe when it comes to numbers. So there's two ways that I look at public administrations migrating or considering open source. First, there's the infrastructure. There, it's really not a problem. Unix boxes are migrated to Linux boxes. A lot of proprietary other services are slowly but surely moved over to open source. Content management system, you find these examples all over the place. The desktop is a lot trickier. It's very locked in. There's a lot of legacy that keeps public administrations from migrating over. And the three biggest projects, I already mentioned one, Munich. 14,000 desktops in total, more than 10,000 now running Ubuntu, and they will finish when they have 80% migrated over. The biggest example, who knows the biggest example, except for me? The Gendarmerie in France. They have 80,000 to 90,000 desktops, and they are in the process of moving them to Ubuntu. There's one funny story about this, about what happens in France. So the Gendarmerie, France, everybody knows where France is, but do we also realize they have a lot of islands in Oceania, northwest of Australia, between Australia and Hawaii. And it takes one of the IT guys from the Gendarmerie a year to travel to all these islands. First he has to fly out there and then take a boat to visit all these islands to update their systems, update their PCs, update the viruses, update the office suites. Now they've moved Oceania to Ubuntu, one of the first things they did. And the guy, one of the lieutenants told me that A, they don't have to fly there anymore to update these systems, and two, it takes them only 2 weeks, not a year. Big saving there in time and money. No trips. That's, of course, a disadvantage. There's always something. The second biggest example in Europe is the regional administration of Extremadura in the south of Spain. They already have dual boot systems on all their schools. It's like 300,000, I think, in total. But they, earlier this year, announced that they will move their entire administration, that's 40,000 desktops, over to Ubuntu. They have been very active in developing their own version of Debian, a local version of it, and they recently decided, okay, let's not repeat all these efforts. This is done when all these distributions were still very rough, and now all these distributions are becoming very, very, very stable, and they decided in the north of Spain, in the middle of Spain, in the south of Spain, that we should not make our own new mistakes. We should just do this on the standard distribution. So they're moving all their desktops, about 40,000, slowly over to Debian. How much time do I have?
I don't know, 1 minute?
What? Oh, put me under pressure there. So an interesting case study, an interesting news item to look up for people that want to have argumentation. How do I do this migration? How do I convince my colleagues? They should look at the Ministry of Justice in Finland. 7,000 desktops moved to open office. And the CEO of the ministry wrote his PhD thesis on this migration. And he was able to compare 3 office suites, open office and 2 proprietary alternatives. So in his thesis, you will find scalability, training, price differences, how difficult was it to roll out, how difficult was it to do a pilot on these things. And he basically concludes in his thesis 2 things. The most important one, you will all realize that if you do not have the support of your management, this will not work. If you do not have your support of your IT department, this will not work either. Because there's always something they can do and say, oh, see, sorry, it doesn't work. That's something we have, there's an application, it's legacy, we can't change it, so your rollout to open source won't work. So you need those 2 with you, otherwise it will be very, very hard. And the other thing he says, you need somebody in this project that likes to talk about it and likes to convince anybody that needs convincing and listens to anybody that has like, yeah, but this macro doesn't work, or I don't like the way this looks, or I miss my little clicky thing on the desktop. You need to listen to these people and explain them why this migration is going to take place and helps them fix problems, trains them maybe on the spot. You shouldn't click there, it's over here. And if you don't have this, what he called an innovation champion, your migration is in bad weather. It's a rough ride that way. So that's a really interesting, it's a thick PhD thesis. It is, however, the most popular PhD thesis on the website of the university, so it's interesting. And the last item I think people should maybe look at is, I regularly try to inform the readers of what happens in the United Kingdom. People in Europe say, well, if the United Kingdom is moving to open source, then we should also be moving to open source. And the government there is really, really, really developing a thorough open source policy, including a definition on what do we mean when we say open standards, what do we mean when we say open source, and they're really trying to get one by one the public administrations to seriously consider open source alternatives when they are about to procure proprietary solutions. So they have a list, a little matrix that says, if you're thinking about Exchange, actually you could be using, and then there's a bunch of alternatives. If you're thinking about an Office suite, actually you could be using, and then there's a bunch of open source alternatives. If you're thinking about a relational database management system, actually you could use, and then they have a bunch of open source alternatives. So it's a really interesting policy that they're building, and that Polish public administrations could also find very useful. I think with that, we've sort of run it through.
I don't think we have time for questions and answers, but we will be available for the rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.